Lesson 10, willingness to accept responsibility. A magnetic leader has to recognize that the buck stops here, that he has to be willing to take onto his shoulders not only responsibility for success or for the work done, but also for failure. Somebody who is without magnetism is a typical symptom of that lack is the wish to pass on to others the blame for anything that goes wrong. One who is strong in himself, who is centered in himself, who has the courage that goes with being magnetic as a leader, will not dream of saying others are to blame when he can see that the blame is really his. But it's a more difficult thing, and sometimes something to affirm more particularly, to accept blame, accept responsibility for a failure when in fact you know that it wasn't yours. But it's only when you can take that onto your shoulders that you can finally get other people to the point where they're willing to pick up the pieces and get moving again. Henry Ford said that the most difficult thing he'd encountered in his career in working with people was finding people who were willing to accept responsibility. Nobody wants to feel that the failure is his, and nobody wants to feel that the final decision for any project has to be on his shoulders. But until a person is willing to do so, he will not be able to have that degree of magnetism that actually carries a person through to success. It takes a certain amount of courage to say, I was wrong. It takes a certain amount of courage to say, well, okay, here is the input, here are the way different people feel about it, but now this is what I feel we have to do. And until a person can do that, he's not really yet in an attitude of leadership, even if he's in a position of leadership. To be able to lead effectively, to be able to bring things through to completion, you've got to understand that in the final analysis, the creative act is an individual thing, an inner thing. It comes from within. It's not a committee. There's a story, not a committee decision. There's a story about a minister who was building himself a boat. And people in the parish would come and say, well, Pastor, I think this mast ought to be a little higher. Another one would say, I think that prow ought to be a little longer. Another would say, well, couldn't you make it just a little bit wider? And he was trying to be a good minister to his flock, and so he was accepting everybody's decisions and, recommendations, and as accepting them as decisions. And finally he got this boat built and he launched it. And it went out a certain distance into the water, and then blub, 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 it went down, and all that was left standing above water was a mast. So he started to build another boat, and people started coming up again saying, well, I think that mast ought to be a little bit this, I think this prow ought to be a little bit that, and so on. And he would say, you see that mast sticking up out of the water there? That's the committee boat, this is my boat. Well, obviously a lot of good and even great things come out of committees. But when it comes to shouldering a responsibility, you will find that the most effective way of doing it is for one person at least to say, okay, I'll do it. It's my responsibility. Committees are great buck-passing organizations. They're a wonderful way of hiding behind an inadequately thought out or felt out situation. You won't find that really creative things come from committees for the simple reason that you don't create in talking, you don't create out here. The wellsprings of creativity come from inside. And that's again why leadership is necessary in any organized undertaking. Because that comes from inside, you can't have it coming from lots of people's insides, you might say, and have anything but the kind of broth that too many cooks spoil. So that that point has to be reached where a person goes within and says, okay, we'll do it this way. Or I'm willing to do this. Or I'm willing to bear the responsibility, but doesn't work. Once you can do that, you develop that kind of centeredness that we've talked about earlier, which has its own magnetism. It isn't so much that taking responsibility in itself is magnetic. It may or may not be. Frankly, I haven't thought that one through very much. But what I have thought through is that it helps to develop, and is a manifestation of, an attitude that is magnetic. An attitude to stand at one's own center, not at one's periphery. To be balanced because one is at that center, rather than off-balanced because one is committed to some direction at one's periphery or outside one's own circle of control. And once you have that centeredness within, once you're at your center, then you have that degree of gathering of energy which creates a kind of magnetism. I've said it before and it's worth saying again. Magnetic people are always people who have a certain centeredness in themselves. People who don't have centeredness, and to the degree that they lack it, they don't have magnetism, they lack magnetism. People whose minds are all out there are not the kind of people who can make things happen in their lives or attract others to a project or even really attract their own thoughts and feelings to get behind something. They're the kind of people who you talk to them and their eyes are sort of looking around, their minds are wandering around. They haven't focused themselves yet enough to be able to take on any particular direction. An important point in taking responsibility and realizing that the energy for doing so comes from within yourself is then to recognize that outer events don't have to be manipulated. You don't have to use people. If you act right yourself, you will attract the right things, the right situations. You don't have to manipulate them. You will inspire people to do the right things. You won't be using them. And so, whereas it may look to a person of superficial understanding, we might say, that the only way that you can really ensure something working is to be very clever, sort of like a chess player, moving pieces here and thinking, how can I use this person for this project, and how can I manipulate events to come out cleverly ahead. This is the way many people live their lives. But somehow the funny thing is that at the end of every endeavor, they're left somehow short. The people they counted on leave them. The works that they were developing somehow get drawn off in some other direction. The people they thought would help them in their project or be useful to them in their project suddenly find their loyalties going somewhere else. And in fact, what seems like the slower way, in the end turns out to be not only the faster way, but probably the only way. To be magnetic, certainly you can't afford to have that kind of mentality that thinks always in manipulative terms. To be magnetic as a leader, you can't afford to let people feel that your projects are more important to you than they are. An organization is primarily a group of people working together, and the projects come secondly to that. Things are not as important as people. People are the thing that you have to work with primarily, and you have to magnetize them to want to get behind you. This you will do if you always put their interests ahead of your own and ahead of the works. You might think, well, that's ridiculous. The work, after all, is what we're here to do. No. One work will change, another one will come, and that will go on, and will be either thrown out or replaced by another, or finished, and another one will succeed it. Those things change, but the people, if you treat them right, remain the same, and it's the same group of people that will be addressing each of their problems, each of those projects. Your real wealth will be people, and the people that you need to magnetize, the thing that you need to magnetize above all is those people. One thing that will make them forever grateful to you is if you take responsibility even for your mistakes. If you say, okay, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it. I did wrong, and they know that they were the ones who did wrong, but you did wrong by letting them do wrong, maybe. There are many ways to understand these things. Basically, if things go wrong in an organization, then the people running the organization are at fault, even if they didn't know about it. They should have known about it. So, be courageous enough to take responsibility onto your own shoulders, and if everybody else says, I don't want to do it, you say, all right, I'll do it. And the more unpleasant the task, the more ready a good leader will be to say, I'll do it. If he can set that example, he'll have many, many people working with him and not merely for him.